Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, June 7th, 2024. It's the end of the day. It's the end of the week. It's a happy time for all of us. It's our intelligence community roundtable with my two dear friends and colleagues, Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Larry and Ray, welcome here. Larry, you are still, I believe, in Russia. Ray, you're here in the United States. Russia, of course, is where Scott Ritter and I thought we would be with you, Larry, when the sponsor of our trip was arrested the night before we left. He and his family and his colleagues advised Scott to advise me not to come, and I didn't. Scott attempted to go, and of course we all know, because it's all over the media, two or three Border Patrol agents dressed in SWAT team gear approached them as he was about to board a Turkish Airlines flight to Istanbul and demanded his passport. They didn't identify themselves, and they didn't give him a receipt. Have you ever heard of anything like this? An American citizen whose free speech, whose associational rights, and whose due process rights, you can't take life, liberty, or property without a trial, were summarily violated on the spot in front of a crowd at Kennedy Airport. Ray McGovern first.
Well, Judge, Larry will remember this quite well because he came to my assistance. I stood up and wound my way onto the State Department BOLO list. Be aware, right? Be well aware. BOLO, be aware of this guy, because if he comes near any department security, round him up. Larry sprung to my rescue and made sure that nothing untoward happened to me. That's the last time I saw that the State Department was involved in this kind of thing. I think this time the State Department is being used by the deep state who really didn't want Scott to appear and to say the things that he was likely to say.
Well, Scott did appear by Zoom. He didn't give the speech he thought he was going to give, as you know, but he did participate in a conference, and he said what he wanted to say. Larry, have you ever heard of this, aside from the incident that Ray just described?
No, and this was a contrived step by State Department. The Biden administration issued Scott a passport that was, let's put it this way, not correct. It should have had certain markings in it because of Scott's status. Well, they were the ones that screwed that up. So they were aware that they had screwed it up. All they had to do was send him a letter and issue a new passport. But no, they chose to wait till he was on the board of the plane so they could embarrass him and make a scene. So, you know, and Ray's exactly right. He was on the be on the lookout for BOLO, be on the lookout for.
And, what were the markings that were to have been on Scott's passport? This is the first time I've heard it.
It had to do with his previous legal status.
Okay.
If you have some prior convictions, there will be some markings in the passport to signify that, and that's part of the reason the State Department knew he was going to travel. Because Scott had notified him. Let me just say, not directly related to that, but I have figured out a way to become wealthy. If I only get $5 from every person I've met in Russia who says that they watched Judge Napolitano and expressed concern about Napolitano and Ritter, man, I would be flying first class back and forth to the United States and Russia 20 times a year.
Scott says that the show is very popular in Russia, and to be honest with you, I haven't accepted all the invitations because there were too many of them, but I have been inundated by Russian media this week, and I selectively picked the ones that I was comfortable with, particularly ones that I had been on their shows before, Dmitry Simes and people like that we know we can trust. Did you, Larry?
Hang on. It's not just Russians. It's Germans. It's Italians. It's Turks. I mean, honest to God, the number of people that come up to say, "Oh my God, we love the judge, and we watch you all the time." It was unbelievable.
Oh well, that's very flattering to hear. Did you participate in any way at the St. Petersburg Economic Conference, Larry?
Yeah. I was on a panel yesterday with Nkosi Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela, and Pepe Escobar, and Alexander Dugin. There were some other.
Alexander Dugin himself, the philosopher.
Oh yeah. In fact, I had dinner last night. Sat next to his wife, Natalia, a lovely lady. She's also a professor. They've just actually published a book of Daria Dugin, their daughter. They discovered after her death that she had kept a diary, and so they're just publishing a book of her diary, her writings.
Wow. Well, you mentioned Pepe Escobar. We'd love to have him on the show, whether he joins you and Ray or whether he comes on his own. He has a big following and understands the world as we do. So if you can pass that on to him or get his contact information to Chris. Ray, the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, has basically said, we will not put up with the West authorizing Ukraine to use the Western supplied offensive weaponry to land in Russia. President Putin says we are not threatening to use nuclear weapons, but if somebody else uses them or someone threatens our sovereignty, we know what instruments are available for us. And the West seems to take this, NATO seems to take this in a way that you've described as blasé. What are you seeing here?
Well, Stoltenberg, for example, said, well, this is not going to change anything. They're just bluffing. And no matter how many times Lavrov and Putin say, look, this time we're not bluffing, they are disregarded. The essential factor here, Judge, is that Russia is winning in Ukraine. That trajectory will not change in an immaterial way. And so I think the Russians view this as kind of a desperate effort by the West to do something to change that trajectory, and they have the good sense to know what to change. Now, the use of ATACMS and HIMARS and whatever else the Germans and the French have, those do not carry nuclear warheads. That's important. Why is that important? Because no matter what they hit in Russia, it's pinpricks in comparison to what's going on in Ukraine. Except, okay, and there's a big exception, and that is when they hit early warning radar. It prevents, that enables the Russians to come out if they're under a strategic attack. That hurts. And that's why you're getting all these warnings. That's why the Russians are saying, look, don't fool around with our early warning radars. That's the threat here. And as Ted Postal, the noted MIT professor emeritus, points out, the Russians have a very limited capability for early warning. They do not have the kind of sophisticated satellites we know that we have, that as long as something is launched, we know about it. No, they don't have that. And so when you knock out two, or you try to knock out two of the only 10 such early warning radars, that's trouble. That's when Putin makes these unprecedented assertions that, look, we can use nuclear weapons and we can use conventional weapons in places where we would least expect it, and we're sending our Navy to the Caribbean. So these are sort of counter threats, but the trajectory is the same, and I think the Russians are using it, or viewing it, as a little bit alarmist, because here are the generals behind Putin, and they say, Vladimir Vladimirovich, two of our early warning radars. What are the Americans trying to do? And Putin said, well, it's not the Americans, it's the Ukrainians. Come on, Vladimir, it's the Americans. Are they really trying to weaken our early warning capability? We better serve them know that's not going to happen.
Larry, how dangerous is it for Biden to have authorized this? I don't know if he authorized this very attack, but he authorized the use of the weapons to strike in Russia, and somebody in the CIA or the DOD knew that they were going to hit the early warning systems. How dangerous is that?
That's very dangerous. That's why threats. Now, It's not completely certain that somebody in the Pentagon at a sufficiently high level knew that the Ukrainians were going to do this. But that's not the point. The point is what the Russians think, okay? It's not what